Guess where you just got into? Cool guy zone.
So what I'm going to use for this project is the containers from some toy trucks. That truck doesn't quite scale with a 28mm figure, but it doesn't mean we can't use it for stuff. So right now all I want is the back container section. And I undo the screws, and if there's any leftover parts that stop it from being flat, just clip them off. Here's some scrap foam, some different sizes of gravel and sand, and then all my junk, which is offcuts from other projects a lot of the time. So my first step, I'm just going to abrade the surfaces of these because they're plastic and paint doesn't want to stick to plastic very much. Do the inside too because we're going to have to glue and paint in there. Alright, now we just wipe our pieces down and get ready for the next step. Next part, I'm using that scrap foam. This doesn't have to be nice XPS foam, it can be old pieces of packing foam, or you could even layer cardboard if you want to. I'm not really measuring, I'm sort of eyeballing it. And what I want to do is not fill up all the space on all the pieces, just fill up some and make it look natural, because we're going to put things on top of this foam to add more detail. So for this first part, you'll see that I'm using hot glue a lot. Now I've got my junk and rubble. This is what's going to make the piece more interesting. So one of these bins, I decided I wanted it to be filled with all kinds of scrap metal, like someone had been collecting it, sort of like a junkyard, but just contained in the box. This really is just pieces of sprue and wire, plastic straws, costume jewelry, parts of broken toy cars that I didn't have a use for someplace else. It's all going to add detail in this. So I'm going around with some super glue. Once the super glue is dry, I'm going to go back with some scenic glue, which is just a watered down PVA glue. And I'll take some other pieces of junk and I'm going to use some watered down wood glue and go around some of the other pieces. And I selectively put a couple pieces of junk in there, but these are going to be mostly gravel and sand. So I'm going to start with my large gravel, this green stuff. And then when that's done, I'm going to come back with my smaller blue gravel. You'll see I have the seasoning shaker. I just put a smaller size gravel in that, it's a mix of small gravel and sand, and went around and covered all the rest of the piece while the glue is still wet. And just do the same for that other piece. I'm making 3 different pieces all at once. I found it's good to kind of batch make, especially small scatter terrain, because you've already got all your tools out and you've already made your workspace kind of a mess. So you might as well make several pieces. So this is what they look like so far. And that scenic glue is still wet, and before it dries, I have another step, which is to take this salt shaker I filled with tile grout and go over and do kind of a finishing coat with the tile grout, which is going to make the piece extra strong. Taking a little bit of wood glue and dabbing it along the bottom edges of the pieces. This will catch some of the paint later. So now that the scenic glue is dried, I'm going over with some black Mod Podge wash. It's just Mod Podge, some black craft paint, water, and a little bit of dish soap or rubbing alcohol to break the surface tension. And use a brush you don't care about. So I let those dry, and the next step is to give them a good base coat. So I like to use Krylon spray paint. This was a cheap dark brown that I got at a discount store. Okay, so now we get into the actual painting part. I'm going to use a mix of a mustard yellow, a burnt umber, and a terracotta color. And I mix them, but I don't mix them well so that I get a good splotchy sort of brown, orange, yellowy mix. And this is a great way to make rust. I'm just using a piece of kitchen sponge here, dabbing it around, and then you can use another brush to make sort of streaks in it. And I underpaint all the models with the same mixture. Even if I'm going to paint them a different color ultimately, I do my rust coat on everything. So you can see how all that stuff, which you usually might throw in the trash after building, really came in and gave us a lot of detailed stuff. So now I want to paint the gravel. I'm going to use a medium gray and cover all the rocks, all the gravel with it in those two dumpsters that actually have gravel in them. Then I'm going to come back and dry brush with a lighter gray, which is steel gray. And then while I still have a little bit of that on my brush, I'm just going to go around that rust pile and give it some highlights. So now I'm taking some gunmetal color and a piece of sponge. I'm going around and just tapping some of the areas where they might wear a bit more. Okay, this is some liquid mask by Green Stuff World. And you can put it on a sponge. I just left it on the brush this time. But go around and kind of dab some areas that might be scratched more often, the higher areas, and then some random areas too. We're going to paint over this, and then we're going to remove that latex mask, and it's going to reveal the rusty part underneath. So I'm using true green and burnt umber, and I'm going to mix them up because that green just seemed a little too bright. I want some old, crusty, underhive kind of paint. Just put that on a kitchen sponge or stipple with a brush and go around your pieces. And I like the way the green turned out. It's darker. It's my version of Necromunda green. Now the other one, I want to do a dirty yellow color. So I did the same thing. Mix a burnt umber to dumb it down. Mix a yellow. Mix it poorly. And stipple the piece all over. Now, once all of that paint is dry, I found the best thing to use is a dry toothbrush. So I'm going around and you'll see that those latex parts are starting to wear away. It's really cool to do this because you don't really know what your piece is going to look like until it's done. So you're always surprising yourself when you're creating these things. Okay, next step. We're going to make a black wash really quick, just some black paint and some water. And we're going to go around and cover all of the dumpsters, the sides, the top, everything. This is going to help bring out some of the detail because the lower areas are going to be darker. Remember, we're not trying to paint it, we're just giving it a thin wash. You can always make it darker if you find it's too thin when you first start. You can see how it starts to accentuate the rocks there, and that shine will go away when it's dry. Next step, take some of that terracotta, which is really a great color for rust, and I'm going to water some of that down and do a rust wash over some things. This looks like areas where water has settled and then dried and left sort of a powdery coat on top of these piles of rust and things. And you can streak it to make it look like rust sort of ran down the side of the old dumpsters. You can do this with an oil wash too, but I just did simple acrylics on these ones. You can stipple it too. This is what they look like so far. So a good color to finish with is this barnwood by Folk Art, because it's sort of a tan gray color, and it's just a great general highlight for all kinds of terrain. And then that bottom edge, earlier I touched a little bit of wood glue on some of the pieces, and it helps that dusty color to catch. Maybe some of the bottom part is swelling and starting to rust. Now I've just decided to touch up a couple spots, like this piece of chain in this dumpster. And then I'll dab a few spots just to add some more rust variety. Use cheap brushes when you're stippling because you're going to mess them up. Okay, so graffiti. All you got to do is look at some reference images online and use a fine point Sharpie and just sort of freehand some stuff. Get some random colors and go around and just write whatever. Once I've done that, I'm coming back with burnt umber again and I'm stippling them so they don't all look so fresh. And you can see the effect. Just layers of random graffiti, and it really gives it that cool urban vibe. Another thing you can do is print out these scale propaganda posters, and I found the cleanest way to do it is with an X-Acto knife. And then just a little bit of scenic glue. Drag the poster through it. And use it to cover your sins. There we are. Alright, so remember that truck we took apart earlier? It had some other useful pieces like these rubber tires. So I've ripped one off with a pair of pliers. And I don't have to do any painting. All I'm going to do is use some super glue and stick it down in this corner to add a little bit more detail. Alright, so pigments. Instead of using expensive pigments, I got these Amazon earth tone chalk pastels. Now, using the back of my razor, I just scrape some of that pastel onto my project. And then with a brush that's dry, I'm going to go around and weather the piece. This makes it look like there's all sorts of soot and ash, and it digs into the little crevices. And after that's done, I think these pieces are ready for the table. I want to thank all my new subscribers and everybody who stuck with me while I was away.